Hello, my name is Peter Timofeyev. Today, I'd like to talk about an investigation into solving a problem that has come up with my group at work. What we're trying to do is allow a simple method of sharing files, such as IPython notebooks in our case, as well as allow access to the shared files when offline. An obvious solution would be just to use a service such as Dropbox, but commercial cloud services such as this are frowned upon by corporate policy. And additionally, with the evolving legal landscape of exactly just who is allowed to look at data stored on cloud services and which jurisdiction that the data actually resides in, coming up with a solution where the data lives on machines that are solely under our group's control seems to make a lot of sense. That, and I do like looking into interesting and open source solutions for things, so I spent a bit of time researching just such a solution. And, after doing the obvious Google search for Dropbox alternatives, it quickly became clear that a new project called Syncthing seemed to be gathering some steam. With that in mind, I decided to investigate it. And since I also took the time to create this video, I think there just may be something in there. So, on to the presentation. So what exactly is Syncthing? Well, it's an open source file sync service that is intended to not require centralized storage. In other words, it's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. It's easiest to think of Syncthing as being similar to the folder sync functionality of Dropbox. Not the link sharing aspects, mind you, where you can enter or email a link, password protected or not, to other people, but just the file sync aspects where a folder on your hard drive is able to be replicated to a folder on another hard drive automatically. And of course, another key feature is that the data is not stored on third-party hosts. Additionally, it's it's similar in operation to BitTorrent Sync in that it is a peer-to-peer application. And BitTorrent Sync, although it sounds like it's quite a good fit for the problem, everything I've read so far about it is that it's certainly not open source. And it has a pet peeve of mine, which is serving up advertising when all I want to do is the task at hand. In this case, sharing files between my computers. And lastly, it has support for all of the operating systems that are used within my group. So, for a little bit of history, the project started over a year ago. Syncthing, the program, is actually a reference implementation of a protocol written by the original author that's called Block Exchange Protocol. And although the protocol seems quite stable now at version 1.0, Syncthing, the application, is evolving extremely rapidly. In fact, I remember reading somewhere that the project is releasing builds every week or so that has added new features and bug fixes. That's quite a rapid application design cycle. The application itself is written in Go, which I found quite intriguing. Having never really given much thought to Go before, this was my first experience trying to read code written in it. Aside from some Go magic that I needed to sort out with its package management while I was building a Docker container for Syncthing, it looks to be a nice, quite capable language. It was pretty easy to figure out the entry point so that I could decode command line options and environment variables, as the documentation for Syncthing is, let's say, a little lacking at the moment. And finally, it's licensed under GPL 3 or greater. The community for Syncthing is actually quite a reasonable size, and not just one person with a GitHub project page. And if you believe the stars in GitHub are any indication of popularity, there are over 6,000 of them. As a point of comparison, OwnCloud Core, which is a full-feature Dropbox+++ replacement, only has 2,000 stars. So make of that what you will. And the primary contributor so far is the original author, Jacob Borg. However, another couple of heavy contributors have come on board as recently as September. So, to help illustrate Syncthing with more clarity, I'd like to offer up a few use cases. Obviously, they're going to be biased by my interests, of course. The first use case is something we should all be familiar with if you have more than one personal machine. In this case, you have one or more folders that you would like to keep up to date between your laptop and your desktop. More importantly, you don't want to remember to update the base folders. You want both machines to automatically have the latest version of every file within each folder locally. And crucially, these files must be local. It is file sync after all. For example, you may be traveling and not have access to the internet, but you still may want to read or update these files. And not surprisingly, this is one of the main use cases that people will sign up for services such as Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, etc. And in this case, the folders may contain personal information such as financial statements, photographs, etc. Files that are generally not going to be shared with other people. In this use case, there's a small, perhaps informal group of people that want to share a folder, but have no interest whatsoever in setting up a dedicated file server. Additionally, since it's a small group, the administrative burden of maintaining file synchronization should be as minimal as possible. And since we seem to be making a theme here, offline access to the files is also a requirement. As far as permissioning, some folders will be writable by everyone, and other folders more of a single person publishing sort of setup. Other people be able to view the files in a read-only mode and not be able to erase or overwrite anything. For example, I may have written some IPython notebooks that I wish to share with other people within the group, but I don't want them accidentally overwriting or erasing and destroying all my hard work. That would make me very angry. In addition, the data may be sensitive. We only want people within the group to be able to access this data, or if we do decide to publish, it would be through some other means. This is set up for the files being shared only under the control of the group. This use case is actually one that got me started down the path of investigating file synchronization software in the first place. We were thinking of creating a statically generated group blog/wiki where we could easily diarize activities and have the website and all the artifacts available when offline. So GitHub's a natural for managing the static website text, as it almost by definition has natural sync capabilities. However, some of these artifacts we want to create can get to be quite large, and we may not want to have those stored in the cloud. Additionally, some of these projects will require collaboration with other group members and with large amounts of data moving between people before the artifact is even completed. And finally, due to GitHub size limitations, generally a repo can exceed 1 gig in size, and individual files should not be greater than 100 megabytes. And furthermore, it's not really designed for binary files in the first place. So now, with an idea of the use cases in mind, let's take a look at in more detail at the architecture of Syncthing. Syncthing has two primary components: a peer-to-peer client and an optional peer discovery server. The discovery service, the delightfully named DiscoServe, functions as a sort of a DNS server. Its only role is to keep track of the IP address of a client. The client is identified by this crazy long ID number, and it has which has a function similar to what a MAC address does for a NIC. That's it. There's nothing else that this does. A client can update its IP address, and it can also query for an IP address for a different client ID. And it's not even a requirement. If you don't want to use DiscoServe, you can enter the IP address directly when you add a peer client. However, for machines that change their address regularly, such as a laptop, DiscoServe is pretty much a requirement to make Syncthing useful. The peer-to-peer client is named, big surprise, Syncthing. I'll describe the major concepts of the client first, and then I'll get into the operational flow. Well, first of all, as mentioned before, each instance of Syncthing is identified by a globally unique client ID. Each client maintains a list of folders that it's willing to share, and those are identified by a user-assigned label. Each label points to an underlying file system folder on the client's machine. Additionally, each label can also be assigned as a master folder, which essentially means that only the host machine can modify files within that folder. And the default behavior is to synchronize the folder with a peer. To work its magic, the client maintains a bunch of housekeeping information about the folder. It cryptographically hashes the contents of the folder, including file permissions, and uses that to keep track of the state of the folders. So, that's all great, but how does it all work? When the client's first launched, what it does is it starts advertising its existence by sending out the client ID and IP address and port to DiscoServe. And it broadcasts it, and also broadcasts it on the local network. Unless, of course, you have disabled either or both notifications. But let's assume that you're running in the default mode. Next, it runs through a list of its peers, which were added by the user manually, and attempts to resolve their IP addresses. Then, it'll contact all of its peers, determine what folders are shared, and then it'll compare the state of the folders and perform all the data transfers necessary to bring the folders up to date. Then it's rinse, lather, repeat every 60 seconds. It's pretty slick. It'll be a little bit more apparent how this all works during the demo, especially the authorization to share folders. Both parties have to agree which folders will be shared, and even to share it in the first place. And another thing to note is that all communication is encrypted with TLS. Nothing is sent in the clear. Except I just lied. The web browser admin interface is by default sent in the clear, but since it's generally talking to localhost, it's not the end of the world. And if you are running the web admin remotely, it's just a simple flag to turn on TLS for it. So again, then you can actually say yes, every communications in the is encrypted. So how does Syncthing stack up to our use cases? Well, the sync between my machines case is precisely the use case Syncthing was designed for. The idea is that you'll probably only sync one folder and use it just like you'd use Dropbox. And since the shared files will only change on one machine at a time, well, assuming you're a normal human being, as you switch back and forth between the machines, you'll always have the latest copies of your files. With one big caveat. You have to have both machines turned on and connected to the internet or a LAN to allow the sync to happen. It doesn't have to be, of course, while you're editing and modifying the files, but at some point before you switch machines, they both have to be on and connected to a network. And this is where a cloud-based service really kind of shines. With a cloud service, there's actually 3 machines involved: your laptop, your desktop, and a server at the service provider. With Syncthing, there are only 2 machines involved. So in order to do the peer-to-peer syncing, you need both peers to talk. It's easily enough solved if you leave your desktop online at all times, for example. But that does use a fair bit of electricity. Of course, since syncing also has an ARM binary, you could always build a low-cost Raspberry Pi server with a honkin' big SD card. Then you've effectively built your own private cloud. That'd be pretty cool. The group folder case is a bit more interesting. It suffers from the same problems as case 1, but possibly not as bad and also possibly worse. Unless the group members are regularly online at the same time, there may not be a chance to propagate the files throughout the group. Again, it can be solved in a similar fashion to case 1, by someone leaving a machine on at all times. And finally, the website folder use case is really neat. It gets rid of the who's online problem by involving a server. And since file syncing isn't a version control system, using GitHub for the majority of the website and syncing for the large files, the 2 technologies really complement each other quite nicely. Yay, it's demo time! Well, in the demo, I'm going to show a configuration with my desktop, my laptop, and a server together. Essentially, I'm going to be demoing use case number 3 minus the web server GitHub stuff. So, without any further delay, here we go. What we've done is pre-installed Syncthing on both my local desktop and the remote server. Later in the demo, I'll install the client on my laptop. What we see on the screen is the admin UIs for the desktop and the server with the default configuration. Let's take a closer look at my desktop installation. The first item to note is the device configuration on the right. There will always be at least one device configured, as it is the machine Syncthing is running on. Let's take a look at the configuration by clicking on the little gear icon and selecting Settings. Generally, when running on a personal workstation, the only setting that needs to be changed is the device name. This is the name that other people in your peer network will see when they have connected to you. Other settings of note are UPnP, which is useful if you're sitting behind a home router. This will allow peers to sync with your machine from afar. The incoming and outgoing rate limit. Syncthing will attempt to synchronize files as fast as possible, and you may want to limit the transfer rate if you have a slow internet connection. Use HTTPS for a GUI. This is essential if you're going to give remote access to the admin UI. If not, it's fine to leave as is. GUI authentication, user and password. It's not a bad idea to set up a username and password, as Syncthing has access to any files on your computer that you do. And if you allow remote access, it's absolutely mandatory to set this. I can't stress that enough. So now that we've set up our device the way we want, let's decide what folders we want to share. By default, Syncthing shares a single folder with the folder ID of default, and the contents of the folder are located in your home directory in a directory called Sync. Let's see how this is set up in more detail. The folder ID is the logical name of the sync folder. This is a name that everyone in the peer group will know the folder as. It's the published name. The folder path is where the shared folder physically resides on this machine. Rescan interval is how often the physical folder is checked to see if there are any changes. The default is every minute, which is quite reasonable. Don't forget that it's not exactly a free operation to scan the folder, especially if it contains a lot of files. You probably don't want to make this any shorter, but for a large folder you may want to crank it up to scan every 5 or 10 minutes to ease up on CPU usage. Folder master is how to make the syncing have a more feel of a server rather than peer sharing. In this mode, you've made this share into publish only folder. The only way files can change is if you change them on this machine. Everyone else will have changes pushed to them. You'll notice that share with devices is blank. We'll get back to this shortly. And file versioning. This is really cool. The default is no versioning. What this means is that as files are changed, all changes are pushed out or received, and files in this folder are modified or deleted as directed. If you have a folder that you're sharing between your desktop and laptop that only you manage, this is absolutely fine. However, if you're syncing this folder with other people, and somebody in the peer group temporarily loses their mind and erases all the files, everyone will end up seeing an empty folder. Not a good scene. Hopefully someone backs up their machine and can restore the files. But to avoid this horror scenario, you can choose to keep local versions of the files in the folder. There are two types of versioning. Simple versioning, which keeps the latest N versions of past files, and staggered, which keeps every version, only purging files based on age. It's using an algorithm very similar to Time Machine on a Mac, if you're familiar with that. With Simple, the hypothetical madman in the peer group could very quickly make all versions useless. Staggered, on the other hand, will mean that even if someone actively tries to corrupt the file all day, you'll still have some version that's fairly recent around. Of course, this comes at a cost in disk space, potentially considerable cost if you have absolutely huge files, but it could be a lifesaver. Now, let's set up some sharing. Myself, I'm not crazy about the name default for a share. It's not very descriptive at all, so let's delete that. You'll notice that the admin interface is telling us that we need to restart in order for the change we just made to take effect. Since we're going to be making a couple more shares, let's do that first, then restart. Okay, so let's add a personal folder that I will use just for myself, syncing between my desktop and my laptop. And let's add a folder so we can share stuff with people at work. Specifically, let's say it's for IPython notebooks. There, we've added this, and since it's synced with other people, I've enabled file versioning in case of an accident. Now let's restart the server and have this take effect. Okay, let's see what happened on my hard drive. Well, now I see two folders that weren't there before, Sync and Work. And there's the shared notebooks folder with the team. Since we've deleted the default folder, we can get rid of the sync folder. Great. And let's share with the team an IPython notebook I created. Alright, so to recap, what we've done now is to configure this device, deleted the default sync folder, added a personal folder for sharing between my laptop and desktop, and added a folder for sharing notebooks amongst the team at work. Next thing to do is add the team server as a device so we can sync the notebook folder. To do this, let's switch over to the team server UI. Okay, first let's delete this default folder we don't like. Next, let's add the notebook share. And let's see how the home directory looks. Of course, I should have hit save. And restart, rather. And we don't need sync anymore. Oh, so far so good. It's all set up to sync, but since we haven't added any peers, it's still unshared. In order to share this folder, we'll have to add the devices we want to share with. So let's add my desktop. We'll now need to add a device for my from my iMac. So let's copy the crazy long device ID to the clipboard. And we'll switch back to the team server. And paste that device ID in. Now, there's no need to set the device name, as once the team server has found the device ID on DiscoServe, it will be filled in. The other key setting, choosing what folders to share. Adding a device but not sharing any folders does exactly what you think it will do. Nothing. So let's add notebooks as a share. Okay, now that we've added my desktop to the team server, we now need to add the team server to my desktop. So let's copy the team server ID. And we'll switch over to the iMac. And add the device. Now, we need to wait a minute or so for these guys to sync. There, they've discovered each other and synced the notebooks folder. Success, I think. Well, let's check the file systems of each machine. Yes, success indeed. So let's see what happens when I add a file on the team server. And let's wait for a moment. Oh, it showed up already. I must have hit it at a very good time for scanning. Great, so now it works. Let's go over to my laptop and install Syncthing. Well, first things first, let's download Syncthing. The links are at the end of the video. And there's our binary. So now that it's downloaded, let's pop over to the Syncthing GitHub project and install the launch control script so that we can start Syncthing automatically every time we log in. Okay, so all we need to do here is just follow the README instructions. So first things first, install the Syncthing binary into bin. And next thing we need to do is create a syncthing.plist file in library launch agents syncthing.plist. And I could actually clone the GitHub project and do all that, but I'm going to be lazy and just create the plist file by hand. It's not that difficult, it's just a text file, so I'm just going to cut and paste from the website. And now we see what we have to do is replace users JB with, in my case, users Peter. It needs to be referencing your home directory. We'll save that, and now we'll copy this. And next, we'll just simply load the launch file. What this will do is install this as a launch service, and it will open the browser when it's finished creating all its initialization. Now we wait for a moment. And we see it started. I'm not allowing anonymous usage reporting. And for some reason, my laptop, probably because it's on Wi-Fi, just does not like the local discovery unavailable. That, or perhaps it's the antivirus software that's required by work. Actually, it's probably that. So just dismiss that. Doesn't hurt anything. In fact, actually, we can turn that off when I go to edit the settings for my laptop. I'll set the name to something that's a little bit more friendly for sharing with other people. And we'll save this. Great. That wasn't so bad, was it? Okay, let's add the team server and iMac devices. If you remember, you need a device ID for each of them, and you need to know the folder IDs. And just for kicks, let's do this in the reverse order we did for the previous setup of the desktop and server. Let's add the devices first, and then add the folders. And what I've done is email the IDs to myself, so I'll just open that file now to cut and paste them in. Okay, now what I'll do is I'm going to remove or add some folders. First thing I'm going to do is remove the default folder. As I mentioned before, I'm not crazy about that name. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the notebook folder and the personal folder. And what will happen is, if you remember from before, both ends of the peer connection have to actually add permissions to share. So if you'll notice, this is actually not resolving the device names yet. So if you see that I've got the iMac begins with KEI and the team server begins with DNC, I can pick those now to share with. And when I add the iMac or the laptop ID to the other machines, then it'll all fully resolve. So this one I'll add to my iMac only. And now I'll add the notebook folder to the notebook share to this. So with this one, aside from doing staggered file versioning because I don't want any problems with someone going crazy on the team, what I'm going to do is I have a choice to figure out which devices to share with. So it's an interesting problem. For the personal folder, it's pretty straightforward who to sync with. But for the notebook, I can sync with either or both machines. The obvious choice is to sync with the team server, as it'll be on 24/7. I could also choose to sync with my desktop as well, but that's redundant. The desktop is already syncing with the team server. So for this folder, I'm just going to select one peer, the team server. And that's it. I'm now almost sharing my personal folder with my desktop only, and both machines should be syncing with the notebook server, the notebook folder with the team server. Now, as I've said here, this won't happen until I actually send my device ID over to both the my desktop and the team server. So in preparation for that, I'll email my device identification, and I'll switch back to the other servers in a moment. Okay, I'm back at the iMac and the team server machines, and I'm just going to simply add in the ID of the MacBook Air, and we'll see what happens. And as you can see, my MacBook Air is now connected. So there you have it. Now if other members of the Team Sync notebook, the notebooks folder with the team server as well, we'll all be sharing very happily IPython notebooks forever and ever. Pretty cool, eh? So hopefully you found the demo useful. The Syncthing community has done a really nice job of putting this together. Now, I've only played with this for about a day or so I can't really comment just yet on how robust the current implementation is. But it hasn't messed anything up yet. That said, it'd be nice to use this for a while, especially with other people as part of the P2P network, not just myself and the fake Syncthing user, to really see how this behaves. From browsing the Syncthing forums, from what my gut tells me, I think it's pretty reliable. However, I haven't run this in any serious way yet, so it's a bit early to call. In any event, I do have a few thoughts I'd like to share. Well, first off, there's really no documentation. The Syncthing forums are very active, and there's lots and lots of scraps of documentation floating around there, but it's all over the place, and a whole number of threads are out of date. And to a lesser degree, the installation is a bit rough for Mac and Windows users, as it's missing all the goodies like single-click installation and a hook to pre-configure a few things, like where the first shared folder will be and other global settings. And although the web interface admin UI is really very functional and nice looking, it really kind of needs native interfaces, like the Dropbox menu item to start, stop, and configure a client. And please don't take this as a harsh criticism at all. The codebase hasn't even hit version 1.0, and it's still in rapid development mode. I think Jacob and the rest of the contributors have been making remarkable progress, and even in the couple days I've been messing with it, it's already been updated. But if you're not into this sort of thing, you'll probably want to wait until version 1.0 comes out. But so far, so good. Seems to be working just fine. One thing that I didn't like was the automatic updates. It's wonderfully convenient, don't get me wrong, but it kind of makes me uneasy. There is an option to turn this off, but if you do, every one of your peers pretty much has to do the same thing, at least when it moves across the major version boundary, as far as my understanding is. I'm kind of torn between turning it off or allowing updates. Since it's a very active community, and the source is easily reviewed in GitHub, it's actually no different than any other open source project as far as security concerns go. But maybe I'm just a graybeard, but I feel a little disturbed about the auto-update function. Again, it's easy enough to turn off, so don't let that be a turn-off. And overall, I think this is a viable alternative to services such as Dropbox, especially if you have the always-on machine as a peer. It's lacking some of the features of Dropbox, like sending a link to someone, but honestly, I'd consider that to be a feature creep for Syncthing. It's really only supposed to do one thing and do it well, and that's to synchronize folders. There are plenty of other bits of open source software out there to serve up a file via HTTP. And if you really need that feature, it's simple enough to fire up an Apache Docker container with your own server. So I really don't consider the lack of features that Dropbox and other solutions have to be a problem. And why not OwnCloud? Well, OwnCloud, if you haven't looked at it before, it's really quite awesome. I think it's a very, very slick system. It's got file sharing, in the traditional sense of mounting a network drive. It can share calendars, contacts, integrate into an LDAP system, has file syncing, and it even has link sharing like Dropbox. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of really cool features, like seeing who you've shared files with, what files they were that you shared, set up expiry dates on shares and all sorts of stuff. However, all that comes with a cost. It's just about as complex to admin an own cloud installation as it is a full-blown enterprise system. And it's way overkill for these use cases. Besides, we already have those services, except for the file syncing at work. And we're not trying to set up an IT shop in the department. And quite frankly, I'd rather not get a 3 a.m. call from my boss when he's traveling overseas saying he can't log into the server and get that really important file. Sleeping's actually a pretty good thing. So, in conclusion, Syncthing. I rather like it. It's got really heavy crypto, it's decentralized, and, polish aside, it's pretty trivial to set up and use. Not sure if we're going to end up using it, but it certainly has promise. Also, I've put together a Docker image that has everything all set up for a server if you really want to play around with that sort of server configuration. It's up on Docker Hub in my repo. Anyway, I hope you have found this overview and demo useful. I actually had a lot of fun putting it together. And thanks again for watching.